Hi all, welcome to this, the first in a new series of videos that we're going to be looking at some of the aspects of the Advanced Hire course. Now I'm aiming to make this a complete series of videos, and we'll see how we get on with it. As you guys know, it's January of 2021, and it's kind of lockdown videos, so we'll see how much this kind of grows as we go forward. But without further ado, to get us started today, we are going to be looking at the introduction of the map skills element in the Advanced Hire course. Now, to get us started with this, in terms of this entire little map skills section, what things are we going to be looking at? Well, first, and what we're going to be looking at in today's video is the design and the layout of maps. How do we actually go about creating them? What do we need to consider? And what styles of maps are out there that we can use to try and put across different thoughts, different ideas, different information about a particular spatial area. When we move on from this, we're going to start to look at Ordnance Survey maps. Now, in the Advanced Hire course and in geography courses in general, you will have become quite familiar with the Ordnance Survey and the maps that they produce. Now, we're going to be using them quite a lot in this, and we're going to be trying to go into a little bit more depth into how we interpret these maps and how we actually use the information on the Ordnance Survey's maps to tell us something about the world that we're actually looking at. But without further ado, let's get started in thinking about the design and layout of maps. Now, things to remember when you are either making a map or making, probably more commonly, overlays that you would sit on top of a map. Now, clarity is key. Whenever you are using a map, you will have been in the boat at least once, or you will be in the boat at least once, where you try and use a map that's really cluttered with information. And it's a nightmare. And it's not something that anybody wants to ever have to put up with. So there's a balance to be struck between making sure everything that you need to be on a map is there, and making sure that what you're trying to put across is clear. And it's where things like map overlays really come into their own. Because you can have multiple overlays that show a different strand of information that you want to go over a map, and you can have kind of 2 or 3 of them to stop the map becoming really cluttered with a dense amount of information. Now, clarity is key when it comes to the 3 main things that we've got here in terms of map design. The actual line work on a map, the actual drawing, the image that you are looking at. There's a reason that if you go on a Google Maps or whatever, and you zoom in, you get more and more detail the further you zoom in. Or rather, you should get more and more detail the further you zoom in. And the reason behind that's really simple. The further you've zoomed in, the smaller the geographical space you are actually looking at. So the more detail you can afford, the more lines you can afford, because it's a smaller space you're trying to represent. If you tried to maintain that level of detail on a much larger geographical area, it would become cluttered and you wouldn't be able to see anything. Similarly, if you think about a road map, and if you wrote the name of every single road on a map of a village, that'll be fine, because there's only so many roads in a village, and it's fairly likely that you'll be able to spatially make that work. If you try and apply the same thing at the same scale to a city, to a country, it's not going to work. It's just going to become a mess of letters and you won't be able to see anything. And again, finally, shading, it's the same idea. Now, shading is a little bit of an odd duck, it's a little bit different in that it depends what you're trying to represent, the lengths you'll go to with your shading. It's the kind of thing like when we talk about 1 to 50,000 Ordnance Survey maps. All the buildings are that weird peach colour. And the reason we don't have different colours for different building types is because it would become cluttered really, really quickly. So buildings are just peachy, orangey, whatever you want to call that thing. It's to make sure the clarity is maintained. Now, annotations. When you are making your own maps, when you are making your own overlays for maps, you will want to add additional information on top of them. And there's going to be wee sentences, there's going to be little kind of statements to make a point. But clarity is key. You need to keep these statements, you need to keep these sentences minimal, they have to be on topic, and ideally you want them outside the bounds of the maps. If you think of having just a page with a border around it and your main map is in the middle, annotations would dot themselves around that border, not right on top of the information you're trying to look at. Again, this is where overlays are really, really handy, because you can have the map and then you can have a tracing paper overlay that goes over the top and it's got added information and annotation on it. Now, things not to ever forget, because if you do, the map gods will come and beat you with like, maps. Keys. Every map needs to have a key. And it needs to be accessible on the same page. Having a key as an extra item on a map you've created, it's doable, but you're asking for pain and to get lost. Always make sure that you've got a reasonably clear scale in your map. Now, sometimes you get wiggle this. I'm going to have some examples of maps in this PowerPoint that don't have scales. But you should have a scale on it, and you should also have a title on a map so that it's clear to the reader what it is they're looking at. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to move on now. We're going to look at some different examples of types of maps that you will be expected to be able to use, possibly to create. And when I'm talking about the creation of maps and the creation of overlays, we're really talking about things that will be really important with your geographical study that you'll do as part of the Advanced Higher course. And you'll want to use some of these tools depending on the nature of the study that you're going to be undertaking. So, first, dot maps. The dot maps are useful just for showing the spatial distribution of a thing, of a specific piece of information. Now, my caveat that I've got at the side, it doesn't need to be dots as much as we call them dot maps. You will find loads of examples where, if you're looking at agriculture, the spatial distributions of different types of farms, you might find that, sheep farms are little dots, then cattle farms are squares, and arable farms are triangles, or whatever. It really doesn't matter. But the point is, you are using a particular symbol to represent something. Now, I'm going to get rid of me for a moment. Yes, there we go. Just so you can see the key for this map. So this map here we've got is from the 2011 UK Census. And it's a spatial distribution of different ethnicities throughout the UK, well, throughout England and Wales. The Scottish data was offshot. But you can see here that it gives you this indication of where the different ethnic groups live throughout the UK, and it's a very, very useful, a very, very clear indication of that type of information. Now, if we move on, and we look at ISO, and I'll make myself reappear. Magic. We look at isoline maps. Now, isoline as a phrase is probably not something that you've heard of. But if I swap out that phrase and I said isobar, you will have heard of that if you've been through the geography course to this point. But we've also got other ISO maps. We could be looking at isotherm maps, or what this map that we're looking at here is an isohet map. Now, an ISO is basically just a line of a fixed value. And the really important thing with these lines is that it gives you a point where you've got transition. You've got movement from one data range into another. So, for example, on this one, if we're looking at this kind of the dotted blue region, it tells us that this is an area where we've got between 750 to 1,000 millimetres of rainfall. If we transition into the slightly deeper blue, we can see that we're going from 1,000 millimetres of rainfall to 1,500 millimetres of rainfall. And then as we transition into the much deeper kind of bluey, purpley, royal bluey colour, we're 1,500 millimetres of rainfall plus. Now, these are really, really useful maps. They're most commonly used in climate and weather studies. But you can, the contour lines is a contour map is an example of an isoline map. It's just using it with a topographic set of data, not a climatological one. But the big thing here is it's about that transition, going from one range of data into another. Now, moving on. Chloroplast maps. Now, you will have seen chloroplast maps before. Now, they are really, really useful to show the density of a thing in a particular area. And again, the thing can be really, really varied. We've got a map here of the obesity and physical inactivity rates by county in the USA. Now, these are really useful they're quite bold and they're quite easy to look at. They can spatially show us different patterns and things like that. However, we need to always remember, whenever we're looking at any representation of data, we need to remember how it was created and what purpose it was created for. The Chloroplast maps, they do have one kind of big flaw with them, in that they tend to make us think that an area is uniform, and that as you move out of that area, you get this really sharp change, this really sharp transition. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, if we look at up in kind of the northwest of the US, we've got lots of these kind of places. We've got lots of very, very high obesity rates up here and very low physical activity rates. And then as we transition, we're saying, right, okay, well, suddenly we move between two, and all of a sudden the obesity rate has remained the same, but the physical activity rate has spiked. What happened as we moved across that line? Now, what's more likely is that there is transition. There is a gradual change as we move between all of these zones, and we need to remember that when we're looking at maps like this. Now, our second last series of map, and I'm going to make me disappear again for the scale on this one, are proportional symbol maps. Now, this is where we will have one particular symbol that will change size depending on the value that symbol is meant to represent. And these are very, very good comparator maps. So here we've got European energy consumption in 2001. And the larger the circle, the larger the total energy consumption was. And, you know, we can look at this and we can straight away say, right, okay, the United Kingdom consumed a lot more energy than the Republic of Ireland did, which in turn consumed a lot more energy than Iceland did. Nice clear visual impact. The big issue that these maps tend to have is that it's one thing you are representing. There is one data point that you are showing on whatever the regional scale or the spatial scale is, in this case, nationwide. Now, our last bit for today, and I'm going to wrap up on this point, flow maps. And I'll bring myself back into the corner. Now, flow maps are used for showing the movement of something, of a thing, between different geographical regions. This one happens to be its exports of coal from England in like the 18-somethings, I can't remember. I think it was like 1820s. But the point is, you can see that something, in this case coal, started in England or the United Kingdom, and it moved to various different places along the world. And you can do this with a bunch of different things. You know, common ones you see today is like air travel routes, sea trade routes, things like that. Some words of warning with things like this, if you were ever trying to make one, is be careful. It's very, very easy to make flow maps look really, really cluttered. So with that, you need to make sure the background of the maps got nothing extraneous on it that you don't really, really need. Again, flow maps work really well as overlays. If you've got a clean map of an area and you want to show how different things, different types of trade, for example, may have happened across an area, then a flow map can be really often the thing you want to go for. Now, I'm going to bring myself into the full screen. That is going to wind us up for today. So we've had a look at a different couple of types of maps and what they're used for. And yeah, so make sure that you're happy with what each of these maps is and how you would utilise them if you were going to as part of your study, or if you were asked to interpret one of them as part of a kind of question exercise, things like that. And with that, we're going to end the video here. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. A little pause there as I try and find the off button. I'll speak to you guys later. Bye.